Good morning. It's Thursday, Dangerous Conservative Thursday, April the 23rd, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity Prayer and the patriotic song of the day, we will have Varney and Company and Dangerous Conservative. All that and more when I get back. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I should not change, the courage to change the things I should, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen. Thank you. Now, Varney and Company.
Tomorrow, Varney and Company pick it up now. Stu, take it away.
All right, good morning, Maria. Good morning, everyone. The war news this morning centers on the blockade of Iran. It is widening out of the Gulf. The U.S. Navy blocked 3 Iranian oil tankers in Asian waters. One of them was a supertanker loaded with 2 million barrels of oil. CENTCOM reports 31 ships have been turned back. The Iranians attacked 3 vessels and seized 2. President says there's no rush to make a deal, but the pressure is mounting, especially in Europe and Asia. Gas costs more than $10 a gallon in the Netherlands. In Asia, The Economist reports that 7 countries have imposed work-from-home mandates to conserve fuel. 5 are rationing gas. The market is responding to all of this. Stocks down, oil up. It's now, $93 a barrel for that West Texas crude. As for the Dow Industrials, a half hour before the trading begins, down 240, S&P is down a fraction, the Nasdaq is down nearly 70 points. Bitcoin, the current quote is 77.8. The 10-year Treasury yield coming in, little changed, we're at 4.30 right now, and the 2-year is at 3.81 or thereabouts at 3.80. 3 stocks to watch today. Tesla, they projected strong results and a big jump in capital spending. That's pre-market. The stock is down 3%. IBM down sharply despite posting better than expected profits. The analysts wanted a stronger forecast of growth in the future. That is down nearly 7%. But American Express, their report showed continued strong spending, especially by upper income earners. That stock at the moment, we'll get a quote for you shortly. On the show today, new polls show people are not confident that our government is competent. And the president's approval rating stands at 42%. He's way behind on inflation, the economy, and government spending. And we look at the royal visit. It begins next week. King Charles and Queen Camilla will face challenges. The family's connection to Epstein will face further scrutiny. Royal watchers want to know if the king will meet his estranged son, Prince Harry, who lives in California. And when he addresses a joint session of Congress, he'll have to avoid politics. President Trump is not happy with Britain's prime minister, and the climate king is not happy with Trump's drill baby drill policy. One more for you. President Trump has just reclassified state-licensed medical marijuana as a less dangerous drug. Yeah, we cover it all on this Thursday, April 23rd, 2026.
And that was Varney and Company. Nonprofit news now. Back in a minute. Thank you. You know, there's something profoundly unsettling and yet liberating about waking up to the reality that you've been manipulated, that you've been used. Not respected, admired perhaps, but only insofar as you serve a purpose in someone else's narrative. And it's strange because we don't like to think of ourselves as victims, especially the conservative. That deeply feeling, deeply caring soul who always assumes the best in others, who offers grace when judgment is deserved, who stays far longer than they should. Empathy is a virtue, no doubt. It allows us to understand one another, to reach across the divide of individuality, and resonate with the pain and struggle of another human being. It is the foundation of compassion, of forgiveness, and respect. But what happens when empathy is weaponized? What happens when a person who cannot or will not reciprocate that empathy encounters someone who cannot stop giving it? That's where things become dangerous. That's where empathy, ungoverned by discernment and boundaries, becomes a breeding ground for tyranny. It begins suddenly. The conservative feels the unspoken hurt in others and responds intuitively. A gesture of comfort here, a silence maintained there, often at the expense of truth. They believe, often unconsciously, that by softening their own edges, they can reduce the suffering of those around them. And in ordinary relationships, that tendency can create harmony. But the bad Democrat doesn't operate that way. They don't reciprocate, they exploit. And the conservative, precisely because of their high sensitivity to the emotions of others, becomes the perfect host. The bad Democrat identifies compassion as a resource, not as a gift to be treasured, but as a tool to be used. They test the limits of the conservatives' compassion and forgiveness. They engineer guilt-provoking anxiety and create cycles of emotional turmoil, not always through overt cruelty, but more often through subtle manipulation, the withholding of affection, the sowing of confusion, the reframing of reality. And the conservative, rather than pulling away, leans in. They try harder, they rationalize, they self-sacrifice. Why? Because deep down, the conservative assumes responsibility. That's their moral compass. If someone is angry, they must have failed to soothe them. If someone is distant, they must have said something wrong. The bad Democrat exploits that compass like a puppeteer pulling strings. They teach the conservative to abandon truth for the sake of peace. But it is never real peace, only the absence of conflict in exchange for the presence of control. And this is where the tyranny takes root, because the conservative, who once had a sense of self, gradually becomes disoriented. They begin to question their own intuition, their perceptions, even their memories. They live in a constant state of second-guessing, and because they see pain in the bad Democrat, often a very real pain, albeit one masked behind aggression or charm, they stay. They believe that if they can just understand more, absorb more, they can heal what is broken. But you cannot heal someone who's committed to using your healing energy as leverage. You cannot negotiate with someone who only sees your empathy as currency. And empathy without boundaries, empathy that does not include responsibility to the self, becomes self-betrayal. It enables a bad Democrat to continue a pattern that is fundamentally parasitic. There's a brutal irony here. The conservative believes that they're helping. They believe they're being noble, righteous even. But in refusing to set limits, in refusing to demand accountability, they are actually complicit in the bad Democrats' perpetration. They reinforce the very delusions that destroy the possibility of authentic connection. That's the terrible paradox. The more empathy the conservative gives, the more power they hand over to the bad Democrat, and the less of themselves remains intact. And the bad Democrat, they become emboldened. Each time the conservative forgives without consequence or accepts blame that isn't theirs. Silence is their own pain to protect the bad Democrat's ego. The bad Democrat is validated. They learned that the world should revolve around them. They believe their grandiosity is justified. Their manipulation is clever. Their cruelty is deserved. The conservative's empathy becomes the soil in which bad Democrat entitlement grows unchecked. At its worst, this dynamic becomes a psychological prison. The conservative internalizes the belief that they must continue. Back in a minute. Thank you. The conservative fears being called selfish. They fear losing the identity of the good one. But what they don't realize is that by allowing their empathy to be used as a weapon against themselves, they're not being good. They're being consumed. The bad Democrat thrives on your self-doubt, not by accident, and not as a byproduct of some chaotic dynamic, but deliberately and methodically. They feed on self-doubt because for the bad Democrat to maintain their illusion of superiority, someone else has to play the inferior role. And who better than the conservative? Someone already inclined to question themselves, someone who sees value in growth, reflection, and understanding. These traits, while admirable, become vulnerabilities in the hands of someone who seeks control, not connection. In the early stages, the bad Democrat doesn't attack directly. That would be too obvious. Instead, they plant seeds. They drop subtle comments. Their phrases seem harmless and in isolation even reasonable, but over time they create a fracture in the conservative sense of reality. The conservative begins to doubt their own perceptions, to second-guess their own feelings. They ask themselves, did I overreact? Did I misunderstand? Is it my fault? This is called gaslighting, and it's not simply manipulation. is psychological destabilization. The bad Democrat doesn't just want the conservative to feel bad, they want the conservative to become dependent on them to define what is true. The bad Democrat becomes the authority on reality. Once that dynamic is in place, the conservative no longer trusts themselves. They defer, they submit, they conform. All of this happens quietly, beneath the surface, often without a single raised voice. And while the conservative spirals inward, struggling with confusion and shame, the bad Democrat thrives. That usually starts with a dialect because self-doubt weakens boundaries. When you question your self-worth, you don't demand respect. When you question your memory, you don't defend your perspective. When you question your emotions, you suppress your needs. The bad Democrat knows this. Perhaps not always consciously, but they instinctively push in the direction where they feel the most leverage. And your self-doubt is a wide open door. This is not about the bad Democrat being hurt or insecure. That narrative often protects them. They're not wounded children lashing out. They are adults making choices that preserve their power. Their behavior is not the result of emotional incompetence, but strategic domination. They maintain control by fragmenting your confidence because a fractured self cannot resist. It can only comply, hoping that enough compliance will lead to peace. What's most insidious is that the bad Democrat will often cloak their attacks in concern. They may frame their criticism as just being honest or claim they're helping you grow. They might say things like, "I just want what's best for the country," while simultaneously undermining the country. Every aspect of who we are, our appearance, our intelligence, our capabilities, all gradually called into question. Not always through insults, but through comparison, sarcasm, or emotional withdrawal. The goal is always the same. Make you doubt yourself so deeply that you cling to them for validation. And when you do seek their validation, they withhold it. They ration approval like a drug dealer controlling supply. One day they'll praise you. The next day they'll go cold. This cycle of approval and rejection becomes addictive. The conservative, desperate to regain a sense of equilibrium, tries harder. They become more compliant, more accommodating, more self-erasing, believing that if they can just do everything right, the bad Democrat will cooperate. But that moment never comes, because it's not about being right. It's about staying unsure. The bad Democrat doesn't want peace. They want dominance, and self-doubt is the perfect leash. It keeps the conservative within range, compliant, and confused, constantly working to regain something they never actually lost, their worth. Over time, this internalized self-doubt reshapes the conservative's identity. Back in a minute. Thank you. This internalized self-doubt reshapes the conservative's identity. They begin to think small, speak less, fear conflict, and seek permission. They lose their natural confidence, their spontaneity, their spark, and they don't even realize it's happening. That's the genius of bad Democrat manipulation. It convinces the victim that the destruction is their own fault. The bad Democrat never has to raise their voice. They simply have to raise a question and let the conservative do the rest. Walking away is not cruelty, it's moral clarity. That distinction is essential to understand because the conservative, conditioned to equate respect with sacrifice, often interprets the act of leaving as an act of harm. They're deeply attuned to the image it presents. But that confusion, the belief that protecting yourself is somehow unjust, is the very distortion that keeps them trapped. The truth is, walking away from a bad Democrat isn't an act of aggression. It's a refusal to participate in a lie. The conservative has spent months, sometimes years, trying to fix what isn't broken in themselves. They've tried to explain, to compromise, to empathize even further with someone who never reciprocates. They've rewritten their values, swallowed their voice, minimized their hurt, all in the hope that this would inspire respect. But the bad Democrat doesn't see that as respectable. They see it as weakness. In their mind, your willingness to endure mistreatment proves that you deserve it. The more you stay, the less they respect you. The more you give, the less they value what is given. And so the conservative begins to diminish. Not all at once, but in a slow erosion. A chipping away of self-respect, of energy, of dignity. Each manipulation, each lie, each cold silence or calculated guilt trip drives another crack into the impasse core. They begin to see themselves not as worthy of respect, but as flawed, difficult, even broken. They internalize the bad Democrats' projections. They try harder to please, harder to adapt. They apologize for things that were never their fault, and in doing so, they move farther away from their authentic self. But something happens eventually. Not always loudly, not in a moment of drama. Sometimes it comes quietly in the stillness of yet another sleepless night. It's a realization not of anger, but of clarity. The conservative sees the pattern. They realize they've been trying to build a bridge to someone who never intended to meet them halfway. And with that realization comes a shift from shame to recognition, from guilt to truth. They see that staying is no longer compassionate, it's self-abandonment. This is where moral clarity begins. It is the understanding that you are not obligated to destroy yourself to preserve someone else's comfort. That respect, real respect, does not require the erosion of identity. It does not demand silence in the face of cruelty or submission in the face of control. The conservative begins to see that the very act they've been avoiding is not a betrayal of respect, but an expression of it, not toward the bad Democrat, but toward themselves. This moral clarity is not about revenge. It's not about proving a point or making the bad Democrats suffer. That's not the conservative's nature. It's about no longer participating in a dynamic that thrives on distortion. It's about refusing to mirror back the bad Democrat fantasy, the fantasy that they are untouchable, righteous, superior. When the conservative walks away, they are no longer validating the narrative. They are no longer standing in the role of the bad Democrat assigned them, the caretaker, the scapegoat, the emotional sponge. They simply exit the stage. The bad Democrat, of course, will claim this is cruelty, not because it truly is, but because it disrupts their control. In their worldview, others exist to serve their needs. When someone refuses, it's seen as betrayal. They will accuse the conservative of being selfish, ungrateful, cold. They may rage or sulk or plead, anything to regain control, but the reaction is not evidence of your wrongdoing. It is evidence of their dependence on your compliance. Walking away doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop enabling. It means you recognize that staying in a toxic dynamic doesn't garner cooperation. Back in a minute. Thank you. It doesn't help the other person grow. It helps them stay stuck. And worse, it keeps you stuck too. The conservative, by leaving, is making a profound statement that the truth matters more than appearances, that self-respect matters more than comfort, and that freedom cannot exist without boundaries. The clarity to walk away comes not from anger, but from awareness. It comes when you see, perhaps for the first time, that no amount of respect can change someone who refuses to look at themselves, that staying silent does not maintain peace, it maintains power imbalance. that your worth is not measured by how much pain you can endure in the name of loyalty. The conservatives' awakening is a psychological rebellion. It is not a simple change of mood or a fleeting moment of frustration. It is a profound shift in consciousness. For so long, the conservatives existed in a relational trance, subtly conditioned to prioritize the bad Democrats' emotions, needs, and perceptions over their own. This trance is built not through force, but through a slow erosion of identity. The conservative becomes the peacekeeper, the emotional caretaker, the mirror that reflects whatever the bad Democrat needs to see in order to maintain their inflated self-improvement. And the more the conservative bends, the more they are praised for their cooperation, their bipartisanship, their understanding, until one day they don't even recognize themselves anymore. But awakening begins with discomfort, a growing dissonance between what is felt and what is said, between what is endured and what is deserved. The conservative starts to sense the incongruity, the contradiction, the quiet violence of a relationship where only one person is ever truly allowed to be seen. The conservative may not act immediately. Often, they wrestle with guilt, confusion, and fear. They review the past obsessively, wondering where they went wrong, if they misread the situation, if maybe they're just being too sensitive. But the seed is planted. Something in them has stopped agreeing, even if they don't yet know how to stop complying. This is the moment the rebellion begins, not outwardly, but internally. It is a return to inner authority, a reawakening of the voice that was silenced, the instincts that were overridden, the truth that was buried under layers of false peace. The conservative begins to notice the patterns, the manipulation disguised as concern, the gaslighting, mass dishonesty. They start asking dangerous questions. Why do I feel worse after every conversation? Why do I feel smaller in the bad Democrats' presence? Why do I never feel seen, even though I compromise? These questions are not just intellectual, they are existential. They strike at the core of the narrative the bad Democrat has worked so hard to construct. The psychological rebellion grows as the conservative starts reclaiming language. They begin to name what they have experienced not as misunderstandings, but as abuse, not as personality differences, but as a power imbalance. They begin to challenge the internalized stories that kept them submissive, the belief that loyalty means silence, that boundaries are selfish. These realizations are not easy. In fact, they are often accompanied by deep grief, because the conservative must come to terms with the role they played in their own suffering. They must face the fact that their compassion, though well-intended, was used against them. And that recognition is brutal. But it is also liberating, because once the conservative stops believing the bad Democrats' narrative, they begin to rewrite their own. They start to remember who they were before the distortion. They reconnect with their own emotions, not the ones they were taught to suppress, but the raw, honest feelings that arise when they finally stopped filtering everything through someone else's needs. They learn to trust their gut again, to interpret discomfort as a signal rather than a flaw. They realize that healthy respect does not require the abandonment of the self. The bad Democrat, sensing this change, often reacts with urgency. They might escalate their manipulation, become more attentive, more apologetic. They will do whatever it takes to pull the conservative back into the role they've always played. But the awakened conservative no longer responds in the same way. They begin to see through the cycle of the idealization, the devaluation, the guilt, the hoovering. And though they may still feel the pull of old patterns, they no longer mistake that pull for respect. The rebellion deepens when the conservative stops managing the bad Democrats' emotions. They no longer explain their choices to avoid conflict. Back in a minute. Thank you. more attentive, more apologetic. The bad Democrat will do whatever it takes to pull the conservative back into the role they've always played. But the awakened conservative no longer responds in the same way. They begin to see through the cycle, the idealization, the devaluation, the guilt. And though they may still feel the pull of old patterns, they no longer mistake that pull for respect. The rebellion deepens when the conservative stops managing the bad Democrats' emotions. They no longer explain their choices to avoid conflict. They stop absorbing blame that isn't theirs. They refuse to be baited into arguments that go nowhere. Instead, they become quiet, not out of submission, but out of clarity. They recognize that not every battle is worth fighting, especially when the war is rigged. Their energy shifts from trying to be understood by the bad Democrat to trying to understand themselves. This inner shift radiates outward. The conservative may begin setting boundaries that once felt impossible. They may distance themselves physically, emotionally, spiritually. They may speak truths that once terrified them. This is not about becoming cold or hardened. It's about becoming integrated. For the first time, the conservative honors both their capacity to feel and their right to protect that capacity. They become fierce in a way that is not loud, but unshakable. Silence and distance are the bad Democrats' undoing. This is a truth that few understand until they have lived it, until they have felt the heavy weight of presence that feeds the bad Democrats' insatiable hunger for control and validation. Bad Democrats depend on engagement, any engagement, because it sustains the illusion of their power. When you react, respond, argue, or plead, you feed their narrative. You confirm their significance. You validate the world they have constructed around themselves. But when silence and distance enter the picture, that narrative begins to unravel. For the conservative, silence and distance may feel counterintuitive or even cruel. After all, empathy is about connection, about presence. To withdraw, to step back, to say nothing, it feels like abandonment. It feels like giving up. But this is precisely why silence and distance holds such power. They disrupt the bad Democrats' expectations and control. They refuse to provide the emotional supply that the bad Democrat relies on to maintain their grandiosity. Psychological supply is the energy drawn from others' attention, admiration, or reaction. It's not just praise, but any form of emotional input that keeps the bad Democrat at the center of attention. And when the conservative engages, whether through conflict or compliance, they provide this supply, even if it comes disguised as frustration, sadness, or withdrawal. The bad Democrat doesn't care about the quality of the attention. They care about the attention exists. They need it to reinforce their fragile self-immunity. Silence disrupts that. When the conservative stops responding, the bad Democrat faces a void. And the void is terrifying. It forces them to confront the absence of the usual feedback loop. Without a mirror to reflect their importance, the bad Democrats' grandiosity falters. They may attempt to fill the silence with louder voices, threats, accusations, and dramatic gestures. But these efforts only highlight their dependence on external validation. Distance operates on a similar principle. Physical or emotional distance removes the bad Democrats' immediate access to the conservatives' energy. It creates space where the bad Democrat cannot manipulate in real time. It denies them control over the conservatives' environment and emotions. Distance challenges the bad Democrats' assumption that they are always within reach to exert influence. This dynamic is deeply unsettling for the bad Democrat. They may react with desperation, trying to close the gap. They may send messages, make promises, or escalate conflicts to break through the silence. But the conservative, having awakened to the manipulation, understands that maintaining silence and distance is a form of self-preservation. It is a boundary that protects a conservative's fragile sense of self from being consumed. Silence and distance also provide the conservative with space to heal and reflect. In the chaos, the conservative's voice is often drowned out by bad Democrat demands and distortion. By stepping back, the conservative creates a quiet zone where their own thoughts and feelings can surface, and they can begin to discern truth from illusion, strength from vulnerability. This clarity is essential for recovery and growth. Furthermore, silence and distance challenge the bad Democrat's illusion of control. The bad Democrat thrives on the idea that they can dictate reality for others. They construct narratives where they are the victim, the hero, or the martyr, roles that require constant audience participation. When the conservative refuses to engage, they refuse to be cast in these roles. They deny the bad Democrat the performance they need to sustain their self-immunity. This refusal is inherently threatening to the bad Democrat because it strips away the mask they wear for the world. Without an audience, their carefully crafted persona begins to crack. They're forced to face themselves without filters, without defenses, and bad Democrats are rarely prepared for this confrontation. For the conservative, cultivating silence and distance is not about punishment or revenge. It's an act of courage and wisdom. It is saying, I will no longer participate in your game. Back in a minute. Thank you. It is reclaiming agency in a dynamic designed to erode it. It's protecting the self from further injury. The challenge for the conservative lies in maintaining this stance without succumbing to guilt or fear. The bad Democrats' reactions may trigger old patterns of responsibility and caretaking. The conservative may feel compelled to explain, to justify, to soothe. But in doing so, they step back into the cycle. True healing requires steadfastness in silence and distance. In this way, silence and distance become tools of transformation. They enable the conservative to dismantle the toxic dynamic from within without confrontation or escalation. They allow for the slow but sure restoration of selfhood, the rebuilding of boundaries, confidence, and inner peace. And in that space, the conservative can finally reclaim the freedom that was stolen by years of manipulation and control. Freedom begins where illusion ends. This is a profound truth that underpins the journey. For anyone who's been entangled with a bad Democrat, especially the conservative who has long been caught in the web of distorted reality, bad Democrats are masters of illusion. Illusions about themselves, about the world, and about the people they manipulate. They craft narratives that serve their needs, obscuring the truth and bending perception to maintain control. For the conservative, freedom is only possible when these illusions are shattered, when the fog of deception clears and the stark light of reality shines through. Illusion is a powerful force because it offers a seductive comfort. It allows the conservative to hold on, to hope, to believe in the possibility of change, to rationalize the contradictions and inconsistencies in the bad Democrats' behavior. It's easier to imagine that the abuse is temporary, that the cruelty masks pain, that respect will ultimately prevail. These illusions function as a psychological shield protecting the conservative from the unbearable weight of reality. But they are also chains, binding the conservative to a cycle of suffering. The bad Democrats' illusions are not random or accidental. They are meticulously constructed and maintained through manipulation and deceit. Gaslighting is a key tool in this process, a technique designed to make the conservative question their own memories, perceptions, and sanity. The bad Democrat rewrites history, denies facts, and invalidates feelings. Over time, the conservative internalizes these distortions. Losing sight of their own truth, conservatives begin to live in a parallel reality where their self-worth is contingent on the bad Democrats' narrative. Breaking free from this illusion requires immense courage and self-awareness. It means facing the painful truth that they are not what they seem. It means acknowledging that the patience the conservative has poured into the relationship was met with exploitation rather than reciprocity. This recognition is devastating, but it is also liberating. It clears the path for authentic healing and growth. When the illusion ends, the conservative begins to reclaim their autonomy. They see themselves not as a reflection of the bad Democrats' needs, but as a whole complex individual deserving of respect. They learn to trust their own perceptions and feelings again, no longer doubting themselves to maintain peace. This shift is fundamental to freedom because it restores the conservative's internal compass, the ability to navigate life based on reality rather than fantasy. Freedom also involves reclaiming boundaries that were eroded or ignored. Bad Democrats thrive on boundary violations. They push, manipulate, and overstep limits because they believe the world owes them compliance. The conservative, in breaking free, learns to set and enforce boundaries with firmness and clarity. These boundaries are not walls, but guardrails. They protect the conservative's well-being while allowing genuine connection with others who respect and value them. Another dimension of freedom is the release from emotional dependence on the bad Democrat. Conservatives often find themselves emotionally entangled, feeling responsible for the bad Democrats' feelings and outcomes. This codependence perpetuates the cycle of manipulation. Freedom means disentangling these emotional bonds. Back in a minute. Thank you. Recognizing that the bad Democrats' choices and feelings are not the conservatives' burden to carry. It means cultivating self-compassion and self-care, shifting the focus inward rather than outward. The journey toward freedom is not linear or easy. It involves setbacks, moments of doubt, and ongoing self-reflection. The bad Democrats' influence may persist through intermittent contact or shared environments. The conservative must remain vigilant, continuously affirming the truth against the pull of illusions. Support from colleagues can be crucial in sustaining this process. Ultimately, freedom is the emergence of integrity. It is the reclaiming of voice, power, and identity. It is the ability to live without fear of manipulation, without sacrificing self for the sake of another's ego. It is the realization that respect must be mutual, not one-sided. For the conservative who walks away from the bad Democrat, freedom is the reward of courage, the prize earned by dismantling illusions and standing firm in reality. You know, people often mistake kindness for virtue, and that's a problem, because kindness unmoored from truth and responsibility quickly becomes cowardice, especially when it's directed at someone who exploits it like a bad Democrat. Kindness is a virtue, no doubt, but like any virtue, when it's misapplied or misunderstood, it can become destructive. We're told from a young age to be nice, to be kind, to give others the benefit of the doubt. And that's fine as far as it goes. But if you don't understand the context, if you don't grasp who it is you're being kind to and why, then you risk enabling the exact sort of behavior that kindness is meant to prevent. This is particularly true when dealing with bad Democrats, who are often skilled at extracting kindness from others for their own benefit. When you extend kindness to someone who manipulates lies or distorts reality to maintain their fragile ego, you're not being virtuous, you're being used. A bad Democrat doesn't see your kindness as a gesture of goodwill, they see it as a weakness, as an entry point, as leverage. They learn quickly that if they play the right emotional chords, they'll make themselves the victim, or pretend to be misunderstood, or sprinkle in a little charm. You'll yield. You'll let things go. You'll suppress your discomfort. You'll rationalize the red flags. Why? Because you don't want to be unkind, because you don't want to seem judgmental. But here's the hard truth. That instinct, noble as it seems on the surface, can make you a collaborator in your own undoing. When you continue to show kindness to someone who repeatedly oversteps your boundaries, who twists your words, who gaslights you into questioning your own sanity, you're not being compassionate. You're being complicit. You're participating in the illusion they create. Bad Democrats thrive in that illusion. They survive by maintaining a narrative where they're always the misunderstood genius, the unjustly criticized hero, the perpetual victim. And they need enablers. People who won't call them out, who won't confront them, who will keep smoothing things over. Kindness becomes the oil that keeps their machine of manipulation running. This is not about advocating cruelty. It's not about becoming hardened or cynical. It's about recognizing the truth. Kindness requires strength. It requires discernment. It means knowing when to say no, when to walk away, when to stop giving someone the benefit of the doubt because they've used up all their credit. Being truly kind doesn't mean avoiding conflict at all costs. It means being willing to risk conflict in the service of truth. It means standing up, not just for others, but for yourself. And that's not easy. It's far easier to keep the peace, to avoid the confrontation, to tell yourself that maybe they're just having a bad day, that maybe you misunderstood, that maybe you're overreacting. But those mental gymnastics come at a cost. They erode your self-respect. They blur your moral clarity. And over time, they convince you that your discomfort, your instincts, your boundaries are less important than someone else's approval. That's not kindness. That's self-abandonment. And the bad Democrat counts on it. They know you hesitate to push back. They know you'll second-guess yourself. They know how to exploit your fear of being mean or unfair, and they will continue to push the line, to test your limits, to see how much they can take before you finally say enough. But if you never say it, if you never draw that line, then your kindness becomes their cover. It becomes the shield they hide behind. It becomes the justification they use to keep doing what they're doing. If it were really that bad, they think, they'd stop me. But you don't stop them because you're kind, because you care, because you're trying to be the better person. And while you're doing that, while you're twisting yourself into knots to maintain the image of decency, they're taking full advantage to shape the narrative. They're painting themselves as the injured party. And you become the enabler, the one who let it happen. Back in a minute. Thank you. Not because you're malicious, not because you lack intelligence or awareness, but because you believe deep down that being kind is always the right thing to do. A bad Democrat thrives on your kindness. That's the foundation of their power. Not just their charm, not just their self-importance, but your willingness to respond in the way they need you to. They are expert social engineers. They figure out quickly what makes you tick, what makes you feel responsible, what makes you feel guilty. They calibrate their behavior to ensure you react, whether it's through admiration, sympathy, or fear. And once they know how to extract that reaction from you, they repeat the cycle over and over until you become trained to respond the way they want, almost reflexively. This isn't random, it's calculated, even if not always consciously. Bad Democrats sense what you're willing to tolerate. They test your boundaries, not to understand you better, but to figure out how far they can push you before you break. They don't want connection. They want control, disguised as intimacy, and compliance is the currency they trade in. That's what gives them access. If you agree with their view of the world, their narrative, their victimhood, their grandeur, then you're safe, useful even. The moment you challenge it, even gently, you become a threat. Now the problem isn't just that bad Democrats seek validation. Everyone wants some validation. It's a normal human need. The problem is that for a bad Democrat, validation isn't a request. It's a demand. It's not optional. It's expected. And your failure to provide it exactly as they want, when they want, will be met with punishment. That punishment may be subtle, a cold shoulder, passive-aggressive remarks, withdrawal, or it may be rage, accusation, character assassination. The point is, your emotions are no longer yours. They're tools in a system of psychological reward and punishment designed to reinforce the bad Democrats' sense of control and superiority. The tragedy is that many people, especially those who are naturally empathetic, don't realize this dynamic is happening. You feel something is wrong, but you can't quite name it. You sense you're being pulled in directions that don't feel authentic, but you rationalize it as compromise. You convince yourself you're being understanding, patient, kind, but what's really happening is that your emotional responses are being conditioned. You begin to walk on eggshells. You edit yourself, not because it's kind or mature, but because you're afraid of what will happen if you don't. You learn to read their moods before they say a word. You anticipate their disappointment. You rehearse conversations in your head, trying to find the least offensive way to speak the truth. And over time, you forget what unfiltered emotion even feels like. A bad Democrat is drawn to this. They seek people who are willing to feel on their behalf, people who will absorb the tension, carry the emotional labor, fill in the blanks where empathy is supposed to be. You become the container for their insecurity, their self-delusion, their grandiosity, and they reinforce this dynamic by alternating between idealization and devaluation. One moment, you're everything to them, irreplaceable, adored. The next, you're not enough. You're a disappointment. You're selfish for asserting yourself. This hot, cold behavior is not erratic. It's strategic. It keeps you off balance. It keeps you chasing approval, seeking reconciliation, trying harder. And while you're caught in this emotional loop, something insidious happens. You lose your internal compass. You stop trusting your gut. You stop asking whether your feelings are valid. Instead, you start asking how to avoid setting the bad Democrat off. You become more focused on managing their emotions than understanding your own. Your needs become irrelevant, even shameful. You might even begin to believe the narrative they feed you that you're the problem, that you're too sensitive, too demanding, not supportive enough. They train you to question your emotional integrity. That's how they thrive, not through direct force, but through emotional submission. They don't need to dominate you physically. They don't even need to convince you intellectually. They just need to condition you emotionally. And they're very good at it. They study your reactions, learn your patterns, mirror your values just long enough to gain your trust, and then twist the trust in the lever they can pull at will. They don't need everyone to love them. They just need you to be compliant enough to reflect back the image they want to see. Empathy must be paired with discernment. It's not enough to feel deeply for others if you can't tell the difference between genuine suffering and manipulative performance. Empathy, in its raw form, is one of our highest human capacities. It's what allows us to connect, to understand, to help. But when it operates without boundaries, without clarity, without judgment, it becomes dangerous. It makes you vulnerable to those who see empathy not as a bridge for connection, but as a lever to control you. Bad Democrats in particular are drawn to conservative people like moths to a flame. They know you'll listen. They know you'll care. They know you'll give the benefit of the doubt long after it's been earned. Back in a minute. Thank you. Understanding without discernment leads to moral confusion. It blurs the lines between victim and perpetrator. When someone tells you their sad story, you feel compelled to respond. And that's a good impulse, unless the story is a smokescreen. Bad Democrats are often masters of selective vulnerability. They'll share just enough of their pain to hook you. They'll tell you about the childhood trauma, the betrayal, the people who never understood them. And because you're understanding, You want to be the one who finally does understand them. You want to be the exception. You want to be the person who heals the hurt. That's your emotional reflex, but it's also the trap. When you understand without discernment, you become blind to patterns. You see each instance as isolated. Each outburst, each lie, each manipulation is the product of stress or fear or past wounds. You rationalize their behavior through the lens of compassion. You tell yourself they didn't mean it, that they're doing their best, that they just need more support, more time. And in doing so, you ignore the accumulating evidence that what's happening is not a one-time slip or a cry for help, but a consistent pattern of self-centered, exploitative behavior. Discernment means being able to feel for someone while still seeing them clearly. It means asking hard questions even when they make you uncomfortable. Is this person taking responsibility for their actions or just making excuses? Are they interested in growth or just in maintaining control? Do they use their pain as a reason to relate or as a weapon to dominate the conversation? Empathy, when properly grounded, doesn't ignore these questions. It demands them. It doesn't mean you shut your heart off. It means you keep your eyes open while your heart is open. One of the most difficult truths is that not everyone who appears hurt wants healing. Some people cling to their wounds because it gives them power. It gives them identity. And they will resist any genuine attempt to grow or change because that would mean giving up the very narrative that keeps them at the center. Discernment is what protects your cooperation from being hijacked. It allows you to say, I see your pain, but I also see your choices. I hear your story, but I'm also watching your actions, and I won't confuse one for the other. Bad Democrats manipulate conservatives by presenting themselves as misunderstood. They rely on your unwillingness to judge. And if they sense that your cooperation isn't tempered with discernment, they'll use it to escape accountability. They'll cry at just the right moment. They'll open up when they feel you pulling away. They'll confess just enough regret to reset the emotional playing field. And each time, you'll doubt yourself. You'll think, maybe this time it's real. But the pattern always returns because their vulnerability isn't a doorway to cooperation, it's a tactic. It's a calculated move designed to keep you engaged, invested, and tangled. That's why cooperation, to be functional and moral, must operate within a framework of judgment, clear-eyed evaluation. You are a good person. You are responsible for establishing emotional boundaries. You are courageous for saying, I care, but I won't be used. In fact, that's the only way to preserve cooperation as a force for good, by refusing to let it be co-opted by those who weaponize it for selfish ends. Cooperation without discernment is not effective. It's surrender. It allows toxicity to flourish under the guise of understanding. It enables abusers to thrive under the protection of your kindness. And worst of all, it erodes your trust in your judgment. You begin to question whether you're the problem, whether you're unfair, whether your attempt to create boundaries is some kind of betrayal. That confusion is precisely what the bad Democrat wants. They need you hesitant, emotionally entangled, because as long as your cooperation isn't matched with clarity, they can keep reshaping the narrative to serve themselves. Truth is more important than social harmony. That's not an easy lesson to learn, especially in a world where we're constantly told to be polite, agreeable, cooperative. We're raised to avoid conflict, smooth things over, to keep the peace at all costs. But that impulse, while often well-intentioned, can become a breeding ground for dysfunction when it takes precedence over what is real. Because when you sacrifice truth for the sake of harmony, what you're left with isn't peace. It's a fragile performance. one that demands your silence, your compliance, and ultimately your integrity. Bad Democrats rely on this exact social impulse to maintain their illusion. They count on your unwillingness to disrupt the atmosphere. They know that as long as you're more invested in keeping things calm than in speaking honestly, they can continue their manipulation without resistance. They build narratives, rewrite history, twist facts. And when you feel the urge to correct them, to say, that's not what happened, or that's not fair, there's a moment of hesitation, because doing so would upset the balance. It would introduce tension, and you've been conditioned to believe that tension is the problem. But the real problem isn't tension. The real problem is deception. The real problem is pretending that things are fine when they're not. Pretending that a bad Democrat's behavior is tolerable when it's actually corrosive. Back in a minute. Thank you. When you finally speak, it often causes disruption. It shakes things. It breaks illusions. It invites conflict. But that's the point, because conflict is sometimes the price of clarity. You cannot build a healthy, dynamic, personal, professional, or social on the foundations of lies or half-truths. And when someone repeatedly distorts reality to serve their ego, your silence becomes their ally. The temptation to maintain harmony is strongest when you're dealing with someone emotionally volatile. Bad Democrats often use volatility as a control mechanism. They teach you that telling the truth will lead to drama, accusations, or emotional punishment. So you start to edit yourself. You start to filter your words. You tell yourself that you're picking your battles, but what's really happening is that you're giving up the fight altogether. You're letting them shape the reality, letting them dictate what can and cannot be said, and in so doing, you slowly lose your voice. The longer this goes on, the more the fight becomes normalized. Everyone plays their role. The bad Democrat controls the narrative, and those around them fall into place not because they agree, but because they're tired. Because they don't want to be the one to challenge the story. Because doing so makes you the problem, the difficult one, the one who can't let things go. So, in a cruel twist, truth becomes the threat and false harmony becomes the virtue. The truth is not cruelty. The truth is not aggression. The truth is what allows you to see clearly, to know where you stand, to understand what is actually happening. Without it, you're flying blind. You're reacting to shadows. You're trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. And the bad Democrat wants it that way. They want things vague, emotional, unstable, because clarity threatens their control. Clarity exposes contradictions. Clarity invites accountability. Speaking the truth, especially in the presence of manipulation, takes courage. It's not glamorous. It's not always well received. People might not applaud. They might resist. They might turn on you. The truth is not measured by how comfortable it makes people. It's measured by how closely it reflects reality. And if you give that up, if you choose harmony over truth consistently, you're agreeing to live in someone else's fiction. You're allowing their version of events to become the dominant story, even if it erases your perspective entirely. This isn't just about knowing. It's not about moral superiority. It's about reclaiming your recognition of reality. It's about recognizing that sometimes the most loving, most necessary thing you can do is to stop pretending. Stop pretending the behavior is acceptable. Stop pretending the dynamic is fair. Stop pretending that silence is the same as peace, because it's not. Silence in the presence of manipulation is not peace, it's complicity. There will be people who accuse you of overreacting when you finally speak the truth. There will be those who ask, why stir things up? Or, just let it go. But what they're really saying is, don't make me uncomfortable. And that discomfort is precisely why truth is needed. Because without it, the bad Democrats' narrative becomes the one everyone else is forced to live in. And that is not harmony. That is subjugation. Your silence serves their manipulation. It doesn't protect peace. It doesn't maintain dignity. It doesn't preserve the relationship in any meaningful way. What it does is allow a bad Democrat to continue operating unchecked, without resistance, without friction. Bad Democrats are experts at exploiting gaps. Gaps in confrontation, gaps in accountability, gaps in truth. And silence is the biggest gap of all. Every time you bite your tongue, every time you let something go to keep things smooth, every time you tell yourself it's not worth the argument, you enforce their power. A bad Democrat loves environments where they're not called out. They flourish in relationships where people hesitate to speak the truth. They count on that hesitation. They study it. They provoke reactions, deny reality, twist conversations, and when you stay silent, they interpret that silence as permission. Do you think you're avoiding a fight? You think you're being the bigger person? But what you're really doing is teaching them that their behavior has no consequence. Silence creates a vacuum, and bad Democrats are more than willing to fill it. They fill it with their version of events. Their narrative becomes dominant simply because it's the only one being spoken aloud. If you don't challenge, it becomes the truth by default. In the absence of contradiction, the loudest voice wins. And narcissists are always the loudest when it comes to self-preservation. They will take your silence and use it as a shield, as a validation, as a tool. If it were really that bad, they'll say, you would have said something. But you didn't because you were afraid, because you didn't want the fallout, because you hoped that maybe, just maybe, they'll come around on their own. But they won't. Not because they can't change, but because they have no incentive to. Your silence ensures that the game continues. It ensures that they stay comfortable. Unchallenged, unexposed bad Democrats won't reflect unless they're forced to. They pause unless there's resistance. And when you offer none, they assume control, not just of the relationship, but of your very perception of it. Over time, you start to question your own instincts. You wonder if you're being too sensitive. You convince yourself that maybe you're imagining things, that maybe you're the one who needs to adjust, that erosion of self-trust is exactly what the narcissist needs to keep you under control. They don't just want silence, they want internal silence. They want the part of you that resists the doubts, that pushes back to go quiet. Because once that happens, they don't even have to work that hard. You begin to police yourself. You edit your thoughts before they become words. You manage your reactions before they're even fully formed. You stop expressing discomfort. Not because it goes away, but because you believe it won't make a difference. And that's when they know they've won. It's not about screaming or arguing or dramatic confrontations. It's about speaking clearly, directly, and without apology. It's about breaking the pattern of silence that gives them free rein. Even a single sentence, one honest statement, can disrupt their script. Because narcissists are not prepared for truth. They are prepared for compliance. Back in a minute. Before we finish up, I wanted to let everyone know that I have a new book that is available on Kindle, and it is called Recommended Reading for the True Conservative. 50 pages long, and if you have Kindle Unlimited, you can get it for free. Otherwise, it's $3.99. And again, that is Recommended Reading for the True Conservative, available now on Kindle. Thank you. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there, and reminding you that you're not neutral and that the government has no rights.